Welcome to the High Performance Hockey Podcast. Today we're joined by business owner and performance specialist Matt Nichol. Matt served as the strength and conditioning coach for the Toronto Maple Leafs from 2002 through 2009. Matt is a veteran strength and conditioning coach who's trained professional and elite amateur athletes since the 1990s. He's an industry leader that hosts Canada's premier summer off-season hockey camp for top National Hockey League players. Outside of his work, Matt has founded, directed, and partnered with several innovative companies. Most notably, in 2003, he invented a revolutionary new line of sports supplements that he used exclusively with the professional teams and athletes he worked with. Matt was a founding partner and the product formulator at BioSteel Sports Nutrition, a manufacturer and distributor of nutritional supplements. It's a fantastic conversation that we had with Matt. We talk about the early days in Toronto as a Maple Leaf strength and conditioning coach, the influences, specifically speaking, Pat Quinn, the big Irishman, and Mats Sundin. We also shift into the private sector, the mentors he had in the private sector, the little dungeon, very well known in hockey training circles, and his business now, currently. It's a fantastic conversation. Welcome to the podcast. Matt, welcome to the podcast. Thanks so much for joining us.
Anthony, great to chat.
It's a pleasure having you on. Mentor, someone that I've looked up to for a long time. You've been in this game for a long, long time. Actually, since the 1990s. I was 12 years old at the time, and I'm not aging you, my friend. I'm not aging you. We both got a little white. But I appreciate you being here because it's going to be an awesome hour. I followed your work for a long time. I think you're a fantastic human being. The results that you've garnered specifically from your hockey players and your athletes speak for themselves. So thanks for joining us, Matt.
No, it's an honor. It's an honor to chat anytime. I always enjoy our conversations, so I'm looking forward to it.
Awesome. I want to start by taking us back. So we're going to rewind. This is like, and this is where you could educate me. The landscape at this time. So your first appointment in the National Hockey League, Toronto Maple Leafs, you were a strength and conditioning coach from 2002 through 2009. I read an article that said literally before this, there was literally the position was not even, there wasn't even a strength and conditioning coach for the Maple Leafs at the time. We're talking like the New York Yankees of baseball and hockey, not even having a strength and conditioning coach. And then to make that the matters even more unique at that time, you looked at about a 300 square foot facility. Could you take us back to those days when you were like literally just hired for the Leafs? I guess if you could walk me through the process. First of all, could you educate the listeners on maybe the interview process or how you procured the job, and then your first year with Toronto?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to unpack there, but I mean, it's crazy when you say it out loud, but when you think about it, to have any team in any professional sport, but certainly at the National Hockey League level and the team, the preeminent team, to not have someone in that position that, you and I are obviously a little bit biased in terms of that, we think that's I think it's the most important position. It's certainly a very important position, no matter how you slice it, but to think there was no one there is mind boggling. But such was the case. So, I think it would have been, so it was 2001, 2002. I had, at that time I had a business for about 4 years prior to that, working primarily with football players, not hockey players, but then, the nature of the beast, living in Toronto, Canada. Eventually I had, my very first hockey client was a guy by the name of Steve Staios, who's the president and general manager of the Hamilton Bulldogs team now. As it goes, I'm sure probably not that different than when your business, you have one client, they get a good result, they tell a friend, and so on and so on. And you kind of, before you know it, you've got a hockey business. But it was 2002, and I got a call completely out of the blue. It was not something, I didn't apply for the job. It wasn't even on my radar. I wasn't one of these, crazy diehard Leaf fans that grew up. I didn't play hockey. I think you know that aspect of my story. I was a football player, not a hockey player, that kind of became a hockey guy by default because I wanted to be able to pay my mortgage. Yeah, it was kind of crazy how it all went down. I got a call out of the blue. I was asked to have a conversation with a gentleman on the phone by the name of Paul Dennis, who subsequently, now is, one of the bigger mentors in my life. Incredible guy. He was our sports psychologist with the Leafs for, I think, the better part of 30 years, and worked with the Toronto Raptors as well. Incredible person. But I guess, I had absolutely no idea what the context of this conversation was. It wasn't, there was no kind of lead in. So I had this conversation with him. He let me know about it. I guess I don't know if we did ink blots or whatever, but our sports psych passed me through the first round of the interview process. I had another very quick conversation with the assistant general manager, and then the next day was asked to come back for a final interview with the man, Pat Quinn, and I've shared that story before, but it was kind of a crazy process because again, wasn't something I was planning to do, didn't apply for it, wasn't on the radar. So there was almost, in a weird way, there was no pressure going into it because it wasn't something that I was, hoping or dreaming of doing. And it all happened so fast that I didn't have time to get nervous about it. It was very surreal. Went in for my meeting with Pat, and if anyone doesn't know, Pat was just a larger than life, like physically, but then also he's a great, big, huge, strong, intimidating guy, but also just a huge personality. And very stern, especially if you don't know him and are, just meeting him first off, very stern looking guy. I could really, I'm not a slight person. I'm not scared of many people, but he certainly cuts a presence when he comes into the room. But
yes,
didn't think the interview was going particularly well. And then he got around to the question about asking me about my lack of experience, and not just my lack of experience having not been a strength coach in the NHL, because that was clear. I'd never been a strength coach for any pro team at that level, but also not having any hockey experience. And he said, well, how are you these guys why are these guys going to listen to you if you don't have any hockey experience? You don't know anything about hockey. What makes you think these guys are going to listen to you? And I said, well, I've figured I'd let you take care of the hockey stuff and I'd focus on the strength stuff. And he had a big laugh at that. And I at that point, I thought I wasn't getting the job anyway, so I might as well try to throw in a little humor. And he laughed at that, and he kind of shook his head, and he asked me, he said, "Where are you from, kid?" And I said, "I'm from originally from Kitchener." Well, he goes, "No." He goes, "You're Irish, huh?" He goes, "Where's your family from?" And I told him that, it's some small little town that you may not have heard of, and by what an unbelievable crazy circumstance or luck of the draw, whatever, that was the same town that his family was from, and the interview went a completely different angle. And so I don't know, to this day, I'm wondering if that's maybe the only reason I got the job. And if so, I got to thank my grandmother for that. But yeah,
what knows? A story.
But anyway, yeah, it was a kind of a crazy occurrence of events, and that's how it all worked out. So
what a story.
But I would say he did some, he did call my, this is an interesting note for a lot of kids now. He called, he wasn't worried about talking to client references. He called my college football coach and wanted to know what kind of player I was, and what kind of teammate I was. And that was, and then he got the review from Paul, our sports psych, and that was good enough for him, I guess.
That's very interesting and so important too, this day and age, right? Character, success leaves clues, making good decisions, all that stuff. And very interesting. I want to touch a little bit on this idea that you talked about. You were a football person and you got hired for this job, and your background was in football. How did you establish trust in the infancy stages of your career, being a football person in a hockey world, at least with the Maple Leafs, No,
it's a great question. And I think I remember it was Steve Staios was the first NHL client that I had. And I remember the first time that he showed up, he was referred by a mutual friend of mine, Rory Mullen, who was the therapist for the Toronto Raptors for a very long time. When I first chatted with him, I told him, sorry, I can't help you. I said, I train football players. I don't train hockey players, and not me. This was not me being elitist or discriminatory. It was the fact that I take what I do so seriously, and I have so much respect for the athletes that I work with that this wasn't a house league hockey player. This is an NHL player. I didn't want to mess him up. So I just said, hey, listen, that's not my area of expertise. Maybe you should go find someone that's an expert, because I'm not that guy. And he said, well, I'll remember that comment. I always laugh about it. He said, I've been training like a hockey player my whole career, and it's not working out that well. So maybe I should try something different. But that was it. And I think in a roundabout way, I think it actually helped because I didn't take it for granted. And in that case, very different than the Toronto Maple Leafs story. I was extremely nervous. Because this guy was trusting me to do the job, believed I was capable, but I didn't know that I was capable. I believed I was capable, but I didn't know I was capable. It's a different thing. And I wanted to make sure I did a great job, and I wanted to make sure I did great by him. So it forced me to study, and it forced me to get outside my comfort zone and not take it for granted. I think it was easier having played football my whole life and having dedicated every free a minute of my time to training for football and learning about training for football and being so passionate and being such an emotional attachment to it that I could wake up out of bed and train a football player, just, pull it out of my head off the top of my head because it was second nature. That wasn't the case at that time with hockey. So it forced me to study. It forced me to ask people and network and get to, and that nervousness, that anxiety, that insecurity actually, made me significantly better and forced me to get good at my job.
Fantastic. Your duties at the time, and now I know this is going to be team dependent. I know obviously we're talking about 2002 through 2009, so we're looking at 12 years now, 2022. What were your duties with the Leafs in terms of during this season? What were your duties? And contrast that, and I don't know if you have a barometer, like obviously now we've got sports science teams, you've got people. How did that work for you? During your time in the National Hockey League? And again, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but correct me if I'm wrong. Would this be more of like the frontline strength and conditioning coaches, back at the time, like your Lauren Goldenberg, right? Like your Reg Grant, like they've been doing this for a long time. When the position first literally grew at the National Hockey League level.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny. Years ago, I was just throwing out a bunch of old documents and I found my original contract. And I looked at that exact question, what my job responsibilities and duties were. And it was pretty funny because I think it was something about, leading a team stretch and being available to discuss the matters of health and fitness of the players with the coaches if needed, right? It was basically,
cow,
it sounded like a, 30 to 45 minutes a day, a couple of days a week sort of job. But that really, anyone that is familiar with the, working in the league, especially at that time, like you mentioned some great guys there, Lauren and Reg, Scott Livingston, guys who are, like legends in the game, mentors of mine. I mean, it was on a game day, it was an 18-hour-a-day job, and you were the chief cook and bottle washer. You were the sports scientist, the sports psychologist, the chef, the dietitian, the nutritionist, the rehab guy, the strength guy, the supplement guy, the pack the bags guy, the carry the bags guy, the hang the jockstrap guy. You were all those guys. It was quite a thing. And I think for me, and that's not a complaint by any stretch of the imagination. I loved every second of it. And I think it's crazy to think I had a passion for the science side of things, but we didn't have a department like that. So it was, I was able to get an intern, a student, young guy, much smarter than I am. And it was actually Chris Farlinger was, he's probably got better things to do than listen to me talk on a podcast. But if he ever did, he would have a chuckle because he was interested in doing an intern placement with me. And he had no desire to be a strength and conditioning coach, which I thought was bizarre. But he said his goal was to be, he wanted to be a sports med doc. And he just thought it would probably be good to understand what happens on the rehab side of things. And, why not do it at the highest level he could? Brilliant kid. And he had a real knack for stats, real knack for much more computer savvy than I am, which is not saying much, as you know, Anthony. It's you had to coach me through just getting on the Zoom call today. But another guy by the name of Costa Claudianos, who was working in our IT department upstairs. And he would be the guy that would come down usually once a day, and usually for Pat Quinn or myself to fix our computer because we forgot how to log on or forgot our password, or two big Irish idiots couldn't work their laptops. Costa would come down, and I found out very early that Costa, even though he was the IT guy, he had a passion for strength and conditioning. So I said, hey, listen, between these two guys, listen, here are all the things that I want to test. Here's all the things that I believe. Here are my hypotheses about how we should train. How do we get this done? And these guys would just come, Chris was as an intern. Costa would come on his lunch breaks, and with the help of another gentleman, Ed McNeely, really, really brilliant guy, another guy you could have on your podcast for sure. I was able to tap into these guys and say, listen, I'm the chief cook and bottle washer here, but how do we test, the scientific, principles that I believe in training? How do we find out what the demands of hockey really are so that we can train better? And we were able to pull off, we published the first study on in-game lactate analysis in professional hockey. We were doing dartfish analysis of practice versus games. We were doing urine analysis and blood analysis with the help of Eric Serrano and Mauro Di Pasquale would help me analyze lab work. And we were doing a lot of really, really cool cutting edge stuff with no budget, no resources. very rude, and very rudimentary. And I'm sure that any of the sports scientists that are working in the league now would have a laugh if they saw the quality of, the procedures and the equipment we were using. But it was the best that we had at the time, and it was the best that we could do with, one guy and a couple of volunteers and good-natured people just trying to do what we could do. But it was a pretty cool time to do it. And, in typical Irish fashion, I've gotten way off track. But I think that your original question, what were the job duties? There really wasn't any. And I remember Pat early on in my first year, because I only had a 1-year contract. It was coming up to the end of the year, and I didn't get a lot of feedback, almost no feedback from Pat. And I remember going into his office I had these same people I just mentioned prepare all these sort of spreadsheets and pie charts and graphs and sort of, to demonstrate what a great job I was doing. And I had them all set up to give him this big presentation. And he kind of took them and just threw them on the edge of his desk. And I said, I just want to know how you feel it's going. He said, well, we're winning more games than we're losing. And the guys seem to be healthier than they were before you got here. And no one's really complaining about you. So it's good enough for me. That was kind of so it wasn't exactly what I was hoping for, but I think in his mind, that was sort of, I didn't appreciate it as much at the time as I do now, but it was sort of like, hey kid, I've trusted you to do this job. You just keep doing your job. I'll let you know if you're doing it wrong. Otherwise, just do you, and I'll do me, and it'll all be okay. So that I hope that summed up the.
But it's interesting, Matt, because I think it's awesome. I look back now, look what we're doing in the National Hockey League. Obviously, measure, and there's nothing wrong with that. I like this objective idea, but I think what was really unique about your situation is that you used the pre-existing resources that you had, and those people had a passion for strength and conditioning in hockey. So there's context behind the numbers. You know what I mean? And you go from the inside out, meaning you're hiring these people from the inside out, where you get a chance to see that. Where I'm not saying this, and I don't know this, but I'd imagine that there's other models, right, where you hire outside individuals and you don't get that context, or you don't know those people. I think that's actually interesting, and I think it's way ahead of the time, probably, that most people did it back in those days.
No, thank you. I wish, in retrospect, I wish we had access to the technology that they have now. And there's lots of brilliant, there are lots and lots of brilliant sports scientists that
sure.
Now, that wasn't a thing then, but now to be able to bring those people into the fold. But yeah, I agree with you. I think too often what I see and where I think the model goes wrong, it's no fault of any of the individual people. And I think that all of those people have good intentions, and they all want to do a great job, and they all want to do their job and do what they're good at. But I think sometimes you just sort of, assemble these teams by airdropping different people in and assuming that they'll all get along and they'll all collaborate and it'll all work out. And I think I always use the analogy, it's no different than head coaches in the NHL. There are lots of great head coaches, but if you put 4 of them all behind the bench at the same time and tell them just to, you guys all do your coaching stuff and figure it out, it would be a disaster. But they assume that will be different in our world, which is a shame,
That's a fantastic analogy. I want to stick with your time here in Toronto, and there's a couple individuals I follow. Obviously, your social media, and I know a lot of the stories of the athletes that you've had the opportunity to work with and their journeys. But 2 people I wanted to ask the listeners about. You already mentioned Pat Quinn, the big Irishman, and Mats Sundin. Seems like they were pretty important pieces of your journey in strength and conditioning. Could you give us some maybe some life lessons or some great memories that you had working with the big Irishman and then Mats Sundin?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, I'll start with Mats. I think that he's like Pat, a larger than life figure in Toronto. And, I feel a little bit bad for some of these players. I mean, Toronto's got such a talented team now, these incredible Austin Matthews and Mitch Marner and William Nylander. But for so many people, at least of my generation, those guys could score 1,000 goals and it's not going to matter. You're never going to be more popular than Matt Sundin and Ty Domi and Gary Roberts and some of these characters, and Eddie Belfour and Curtis Joseph, and the list goes on and on and on. But for Mats in particular was unique, especially, I mean, this is a strength and conditioning podcast, so I'm not going to talk about the hockey stuff. You can Google and everyone knows all that stuff. But from a strength and conditioning standpoint, he was really, really unique because I don't think I've seen another athlete who combined, the strength and the power that guys like us might, get excited about with the aerobic fitness, that Lauren Goldenberg would get very excited about if he's listening to this podcast. And just being a completely well-rounded athlete, and you know, a lot of credit goes to he grew up in a system in Sweden that turned out, you know, guys like Peter Forsberg and Marcus Naslund and Daniel Alfredsson. And Mats had a coach from a very young age, a guy by the name of Leif Larsson, who I believe, if he's not still in charge of the Swedish Olympic training overall, if he's not, he was up until recently. Leif was an accomplished power lifter, but the way that their training worked, at least at that time, and I used to go over to Sweden in the summer, so I've seen this firsthand, is they had an area there where if you wanted to be a hockey coach or a soccer coach or a strength coach for any sport like that, you would go and do your secondary school, like your college/university, but it would be specific to exactly what you want to do. So if you wanted to be a strength coach for hockey, you would take physiology as it pertains to training hockey players, you know, psychology as it pertains to training hockey players, highly specialized. And all the national team players would train in this, like on this little island, like this little area, right? Just, I mean, when I say island, Stockholm is it's an archipelago of islands. So, but it's this one little suburb of town where they had this incredible training center. So the training that they did was really, really highly evolved. It was really unique and very comprehensive. It wasn't just all about, you know, weightlifting or all about aerobic training or all about on ice skill training. It was a great combination of all this. So from a very young age, he had an incredibly diverse and a real solid foundation of training. But I've yet to see, you know, I don't know if there are any players in the NHL, and if there are, there certainly aren't many that could even have done his pregame warm up. And anyone that played with him could tell you about that. You know, and it wasn't always the same, but depending on the day, he would do a little more, a little less. But you know, pretty typically, you'd see there'd be a pool of sweat, you know, over in one corner of the gym where Mats had just finished his warm up for the game. Part of that had to do with him. I mean, he had a very low resting heart rate. He had a bit of a genetic condition with his heart that.
Yeah.
One thing that we found, just largely through trial and error in my first year or two with him, is that, you know, he felt like as the game wore on, you know, like by the second or third period, he felt almost like he was getting stronger, like he could play, and you could see that in his play. I mean, he's such a, you know, game-winning goals and overtime goals and clutch performances in the you know, dying moments of a game. But what we discovered is that he really needed to do a much more intense warm-up to get him into the zone, to get him where he needed to be for the game. And then at the time we were also using Polar Team and First Beat, and all sorts of, and Spiro Tiger and lactic measurements and all this sort of thing to figure out. So we'd figure that out for him. So that, and I think the other thing that most impressive to me or unique about him is that we would have a meeting, you know, I don't know if it was routinely once a month, but it was on a routine basis where he would want to meet away from the team. So somewhere off, you know, maybe in the lobby of the hotel on the road, or, you know, just somewhere where it was a little more discreet. And he would want to know exactly where he stands from a strength and conditioning standpoint. Not that he doesn't need my opinion on his on-ice performance, but where do I feel he's at from a strength standpoint, a power standpoint, a speed standpoint, an aerobic standpoint, you know, lactic capacity, all these sorts of things. For a guy at his level, that superstar status, you know, most of the guys I've seen wouldn't take it down to that level of detail or minutia where they would want that hard feedback. And he didn't want you to kiss his butt and tell him everything was great. That's not what he wanted. And in fact, he's the kind of guy that if he got the sense that that was what was going on, then you lost all credibility with him. He wanted it, you know, honest, straight between the eyes. And we used to have I've talked about this before, we had a workout that he would do, which was essentially it was a Dvorak complex.
Yep. Which
you would know a lot about, but it was slightly modified because there were some little, you know, different injury issues that we had to modify, like the close grip power snatch wasn't always a great move for him. And we modified it a little bit, but he would do that workout. So I don't know if you're familiar with the Monarch bike, but he would do basically 85 to 90 RPMs on a Monarch bike at 2 kps, 3 kps, and then 4 kps, which is, that's insane. Like to ride at 4 kps at 90 RPMs, I don't know that I could even do it, let alone do it for multiple sets. And that was followed by Dvorak complex with 50 to 60 kilos. Jeez. Like that. This is a big, strong, you know, this is a 240 pound guy with more lactic capacity and more aerobic fitness than most guys, you know, at 175 pounds. So it was very impressive.
What a really cool, unique opportunity. Talk about number one, all-stars, tons of talent, but to be able to have meetings like that away from the rink and have a care meter that high, talk about a pro dotting the I's and crossing the T's. I would imagine, for young players at the time playing, I would imagine that was an unbelievable person to look up to in terms and measures of his aspirations of being a complete player on and off the ice.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I look at a guy like we had another, Matt Sundin was a young guy who came in, played his first game with us, and was a client of mine from game 1 through 1,000.
Yeah.
But to see, Matt Sundin, we had Gary Roberts on that team. Brian McCabe was another guy, Tom Fitzgerald, a GM in New Jersey now. We had so many character guys who also were so super dedicated to training. It was just such a unique experience. And so for a young guy, I had nothing to compare it to, but I hear some now, when coaches now, and I know it's a real thing, but talk about getting buy-in from players. I mean, buy-in was not a problem. I just had to make sure that the door was unlocked and the lights were on, the coffee was on. These guys were raring to go.
That's fantastic.
Buy-in was not an issue for sure.
Fantastic. Tell me, if you could, about a little bit about the Big Irishman. I know you talked about, obviously, the interview that you had, but what are some of the lessons he taught you during your journey?
Yeah, he was, I think one of my greatest regrets in life is that he was really my first boss. Like it was my first team job of any consequence. I'd done some, little bit of work here and there and training camps in the NFL or with college teams, just, being a guy helping out, but not it being my full-time everyday job. So he was my first real boss, my first real head coach, as a staffer, not a player. And I don't think I know that I didn't appreciate how good I had it, because I had nothing really to compare it to. So I thought he was great, and I'm sure I told him so, but I don't think I really understood exactly how great until years later, until it was too late. But he had a very unique way. I mean, in terms of his coaching style, he had such a unique ability to maintain the level in the room. And I would see that, we had really, really good teams in those days. My first few years, we were always a contender for the Stanley Cup. We had really, really good teams. And we would go on runs. We might, you'd win 4 or 5 in a row, and the team would be hot, and we'd be beating up on other people. And all of a sudden, he would come in and lay into the guys about something that seemed so inconsequential, and you couldn't understand why. We just won 4 in a row. Why the hell is this guy upset about something so irrelevant? The dressing room was messy, or some drill in practice that didn't go the right way. But I think, realizing after the fact, his ability to never let them get too high. And if we were in a real low stretch, to introduce a bit of humor, even if it was at his own expense, or to let the guys go and get out for a run one night if we're on the road, and not give them a hard time for that when practice the next day was not as crisp as it should be because it was a late night. He had just said and maybe that, as a former player, that was the ability, or I don't know what that was, but he was very, very good that way. He empowered you as a staff member, at least in my position. He really gave me a lot of freedom, which, as a young coach with no experience, youngest guy in the league doing my job, a lot of times early on, that was super frustrating. And I think a lot of times it actually pissed me off, because I wanted someone to hold my hand, and I wanted someone to tell me exactly how to do it. But he didn't do that. And because he didn't do that, it made me a better coach. And he didn't make it easy for me, but he made me better. And there were times, I can remember a few times where there were some low moments where he would pull you aside and check in and make sure you're okay. He'd never walk past your office without saying hello or goodbye, or come in and tell you a joke. He treated everybody on staff, whether it was the janitor cleaning up the room, or the equipment guys, or the strength guy, or whoever. It didn't matter. Everybody was equal in terms of the amount of respect they deserve as a human being. Maybe you're not in on every, maybe not everybody is involved in every conversation, or trade debates, or whatever the case may be. But you certainly were a valued person, and he made you know that, made you feel that. And I think it was always just a real true first-class gentleman. And the players, even on any team, there's going to be players that didn't get as much playing time as they liked, or got traded or got cut or whatever. But I think, in retrospect, when people look back, they look back on him with affection. They really love Big Pat.
That's really interesting that you talked about coming into the locker room at times when you think everything was going right. It's a heat meter. This idea that coaching sometimes it's like a big bowl of whipped cream and shit. The really good coaches know when to throw a little bit of whipped cream when guys are down, and sometimes shit needs to be thrown when guys are too into themselves or too high on themselves to keep the keel back down. Yep. It sounds like the big Irishman was pretty good at that.
Oh, he was the best. He was the best.
That's awesome. 2004, I know you're Team Canada, World Cup of Hockey. You got a gold medal. First of all, unbelievable accomplishment. I'd imagine that I know there's needs, and you look at like the World Junior Championships, you look at these, what I call short-term competition windows. What is the job in this case? Is it more a management? Obviously, you're not going to be developing any physical capacities in a week's time or 10 days' time. What were your responsibilities when you won that 2004 gold medal?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in that you hit the nail on the head. In that situation, you're a strength and conditioning concierge. You're really not. You're not there to reinvent the wheel. Although there were some guys, a guy like Jerome McGinley or guys like Shane Doan, that were actively looking for feedback and, working on technique of, I remember one day working on technique of hand cleans with Shane Doan and Jerome McGinley, which was wild. And then a guy, one thing I'll never forget is, Mary Lemieux came into the room on the first day, introduced himself as if anybody doesn't know who the guy is. Yeah. But that's just, how classy he was to take the time to do that, and letting me know that he's had some trouble with his back in the past. So obviously, again, everybody knows that, but saying, so I'm not sure what we're doing, if we have team workouts or whatever, but just so you know, I'm a little nervous about doing stuff. I don't really want to do heavy squats or things that I haven't done before with my back, but I also want to make sure that I'm being a team guy and I don't want to be difficult. I'm not trying to be high maintenance. That to me blew me away, because that's the guy who could have taught. He said, "Hey kid, go get me a Gatorade and get the hell out of my way." And yeah, I would have been happy to do it. But for a guy like that to take the time to, it was just really impressive. But that's it, really. I mean, my job there was essentially to make sure that the guys had access to whatever they needed to do to warm up for games. If they had access to train, the workouts were provided for them. If nobody wanted to participate, I wasn't going to take it personally, and it wouldn't have shocked anybody. But unsurprisingly, the vast majority of those guys did participate in everything and wanted to do stuff. And it was a great experience too, because we had some of the best players, a whole bunch of Hall of Famers on that team. So even though that we had team workouts, there were guys who said, "Hey, can I switch this for that?" Or, "Hey, my coach in Detroit has me doing this." It was a great opportunity for me to learn from them. Say, "Oh, that's cool. I had never seen that exercise before."
Absolutely.
I was spent a lot of time with Kurt Maltby and to watch Chris Draper do what they do and how they prepare for games. And these are like perennial all-star Hall of Fame guys. Some of them now on a fourth line checking role, but preparing like it was the most important game of their life. To watch a guy like Marty St. Louis come in, after the semifinal game and before the final game, in there doing squats and training and preparing because it's Wednesday and that's what it's legs today, and that's just what you do. It doesn't matter that it's a special tournament. So it was a cool experience.
I think it's so important too to specifically in the instances that you've had the opportunity to work in, you have to put your ego to the side. I think a mistake I made as a young coach is this dictatorial, we're going to do it this way, we're going to do it that way. And I'm fond of saying coaching's a lot like parenting. At a young age, a directive approach may be warranted, but if you use that same approach with an older person that knows their body better than you do, that approach, it's going to turn to cooperative real quick. So, hey, what can we take away? Or, hey, this guy does this and I like this. Okay, no problem. Let's switch it up. I think that's probably critically important in high caliber, high end hockey, specifically with everyone having their own guy or own girl that's working on them. There's got to be that cooperative approach.
Absolutely. And I think it would have been, it probably would have been tougher for me to do that in football. I think having that level of insecurity and being so young and being thrust into that spot, it was pretty easy for me to realize, I'm not the world's expert at this. So I'm going to provide a great, I've got a workout planned. I've got all the resources here. But if this all-star Hall of Fame guy doesn't want to do it, who the hell am I to say that you should do it?
Yeah.
I'm happy. What is it? You don't want to do it? Cool. Is there anything can I help you with anything? Do you need something? Is there a piece of equipment you need that you don't see? I'll go find it for you,
Absolutely. Nutrition, sports nutrition. I know this is something that you got into in your career, specifically impetus for creating a supplement. How did that come about? What was the aha moment?
Yeah, I think for me, it's something I had a background already in that industry. I had worked for a guy who's a mentor of mine and one of the most brilliant men I've ever encountered in my life, Dr. Mauro Di Pasquale. And through him, got to be good friends with a guy Dr. Eric Serrano, another brilliant guy. And so I've always that's something I've always had an interest in, and it was something I was already aware of. But I think it wasn't until I took the job and was working in season that I really understood the demands on these players, not just from a bioenergetics and game perspective, but just a nutrition and lifestyle perspective, where I knew the work to rest ratios, I knew the exercises that might be good for the different muscles involved, whatever. But I don't think until you understand what it's like to play a game that ends at 10 o'clock at night, and then pack up and get on a plane and fly to another country, land, get up, practice, do it again, fly back to another city. I think once you understood those demands, it really opened my eyes into what these guys need to try to stay healthy. You'd like the goal we always talk about, maximizing and optimizing and perfecting. I think for a lot of these guys, it's a struggle to stay at ground zero many times. And then when I looked at the habits that, at 7 o'clock at night, these guys are pumping themselves full of, energy drinks and, high sugar sports drinks, full of artificial colors and flavors and sweeteners and this and that. I just thought there's got to be a better way. And I think just telling, just telling guys don't do it, right? That's not going to fly. You've got to provide an alternative. So I think, and like with anything else, and I think that, that pertains to anything that guys like you and I prescribe to these guys, you've got to make them understand why it's better to do the thing that you're suggesting, because it's way easier to do the other thing. It's way easier to do the convenient thing. It's way easier to do the less healthy thing. So why should you do something else? And if you want me to switch to something else, okay, great. But what have you got for me? So what I realized was there really wasn't anything else. There wasn't a better alternative at the time. And, we were using all sorts of different random supplements at the time. But I think right around that same time, 2003, it was very apparent that, I had friends working in the NHLPA. And at the same time, I've got a lot of friends that were working, doing what we do, but in the NFL or in Major League Baseball, that were sort of explaining to me about this drug testing is a real thing. Now, you have to remember, people listening now, in 2003, that wasn't a thing. Guys were using anything under the sun. And I don't mean to say that, with ill intent, but even if their intention was to use a safe, healthy supplement, God only knows what was in the thing they were using, because there was absolutely no testing. There was no screening. There was none of this. So I saw this as just such a huge hole in the industry, where you've got all these guys that are taking these the things that we know are unhealthy.
Yep.
And if they're trying to look for an alternative to those things, they're turning to supplements, and nobody has any idea what's in these things they're taking. Sometimes they do know when they're wrong. So I just thought, okay, this is sort of coming to a head where at some point in time, 95% of the supplements that these guys are using they're not going to be allowed to use, because the drug testing is going to come in, and 95, at least maybe 99% of the stuff is not going to be usable. The sort of standard fare of the high sugar, high caffeine stuff, that's going to be accessible to them, but that's not what they should be using either. So I couldn't find anything, so I had to make something. And that was the genesis of me creating the products.
Very interesting. And you think about it too, like you said, a better alternative, superior ingredients, and then the education process. I always say, specifically in the off season with our athletes, we might have 4 or 5 hours with you out of a 160-hour week. That's a lot of time to make decisions away from the gym. Those decisions, I might argue, are more important.
Absolutely.
So the nutrition element is critical. I want to switch gears here. The private sector specifically. Talk to me about the little dungeon, baby. I want to hear about this. I read about it, but I got to hear about this. I know you're in a new facility now. We'll get to that, but talk to me about the little dungeon.
Yeah, it was pretty special. So, there was when I first moved to Toronto in 1998.
Okay.
I started coaching high school football, and there's a high school in Toronto, St. Michael's College, and I was coaching football there. And great, very, very, acclaimed school, at least in Canada. They've had, NBA first round draft pick Leo Routens. They've got, I think 3 players, including one that I had trained that had gone on to the NFL, which is probably a big deal for any high school. But certainly for a high school in Canada, it's a very big deal. And numerous NHL players, and so it was a really cool place. And I had kind of cut my teeth there because when I was coaching football, I would take those kids after practice and say, hey, I had just finished playing myself, and I was competing in powerlifting, and I just said, hey, any of you guys want to learn how to lift? Let's go. We'll go up to the gym right now, and I'll show you. And there's a few of those guys that were on that team that are still friends, and including a couple that are still clients. They come in, they're big shot executives, and they'll still come into the gym and train a couple mornings a week to this day, which is really cool. But I had always had a relationship with that school. And then when I got the job with the Toronto Maple Leafs, I asked the principal at that time and the athletic director, would it be okay if I brought the Toronto Maple Leafs up to use the field and the track? Because, we have a gym, we have weights and, bikes and treadmills and all that stuff. But, working on the track and working on the field is such a huge part of the training that I believe hockey players should be doing. And movement is so important. And we didn't have access to that. So we would still come up and use their track and use their field. We even ran our prospect camp out of St. Michael's one year. So I had always been coming up there. And then over time, I used to, load up my car with all the hurdles and the ladders and the sandbags and the weights. And it was just getting a little bit ridiculous driving from the Air Canada Center at the time, Scotiabank Plaza, whatever it's called now, all the way up to St. Mike's and then all the way back down. Eventually, I asked the principal, is there somewhere here where I might be able to store some of this stuff? And there was a little room in the back of the arena that they were using as a storage room to store, broken furniture from the school next door, some old art projects and things like that. So we were storing our hurdles and our med balls and some of our, stuff that we would use on the field up there anyway. And then when I left the Leafs, I had this, basically I got canned on a Friday, and I got to be somewhere on Monday. I've never not worked since I've been 13 years old. So I couldn't imagine not going to work. It just wasn't something I knew how to do. So I called the principal up and I said, hey, listen, I've got some of this stuff of my own personal stuff stored in that little room. All the players on the team, even though I'm no longer the official team guy, they want to keep training with me in the off season. Could we still use that little room and use the track? And he was okay with that. And then eventually I thought, okay, well, this is good, but where am I going to take these guys to train? I mean, there were a bunch of the Toronto Maple Leafs can't go train at, I don't know, Good Life Fitness or Gold's Gym or, wherever, whatever you got, whatever chain gym you have in the States there. So the room was small. There was nothing. It was just literally a little concrete room, but I had my own, I had dumbbells up to 100 pounds. I had a couple of decent Olympic lifting bars and a couple of decent powerlifting bars and some plates. And I just said, hey, would it be okay if we use that little room and turn it into a weight room? And they were okay with that. And that's how it started. There really was no business plan, no grand illusions of turning this into like a mecca of training. There was nothing like that. It was just sort of necessity. I needed a place, and that was 4 walls and a roof was good enough for me. And that's how we kind of got started in that little room. And it was always my intention to go somewhere else and leave, and that, because it was really embarrassing. Like it really genuinely was kind of embarrassing the first year, because you got a guy like Mats Sundin, coming in. He was training at that time to go and play either in LA or Vancouver. Nobody was sure what was going on, and then to have all these Toronto Maple Leaf guys come. We had some real big shot Bay Street, which is our version of Wall Street, guys coming into the gym, and there was no shower, there's no change room, there's none of the amenities, no hot tub, no steam room, none of that stuff. But I quickly realized that guys at that level, they didn't care about any of that stuff. They just wanted to come in. Like if they want to use the steam room or the sauna, they got that at home, or they've got that at the arena. They don't need that. They weren't coming for that. It wasn't for that. So we just kind of stayed and never moved until COVID hit, and then we were forced to. But until then, we ran that business there for almost 11 years, and it was pretty cool.
Off the cuff question too. Talk to me about at that time. You have an ice component to your summers as well. When you were running the little dungeon, you had relationships with skill coaches in the area, and you procured ice. Can you talk us through how that occurred as well? Just curious.
Yeah, that's an integral part of the business to me, because I think that was sort of always my frustration, and I know you can empathize. When I worked in the NHL, and this is not a knock on any of the coaches, but I had zero input or control over anything that went on the ice. So, to me, the gym work and the ice work, they need to be integrated seamlessly. It has to be that way. And it's not powerlifting, it's not bodybuilding, it's not Olympic lifting, it's sport training for the sport of hockey. And if you've got a complete double blind scenario as to what's happening on and off the ice, it can never be optimal. And I think that was always a frustration. Now, it's not to say that I didn't want to be the hockey coach. I don't even know. I can't even skate. I don't want to be a hockey coach. And I would never pretend to tell an NHL hockey coach how they should coach. That's none of my business, and it's completely out of my lane. But I think it's important to know, here's what we're trying to accomplish on this day from a bioenergetic perspective, from a physiological perspective. This is what we're trying to accomplish. These are the things that should happen. These are the things that cannot happen today. They can happen tomorrow, but they just can't happen today. And any drill that you want to do, any drill that you like that satisfies this criteria over here, amazing. Any drill that you were planning on doing that attacks this, please don't do that today. That's all. Do it tomorrow. There are certain days where, if you want to have these guys crawling off the ice on their hands and knees, I'm okay with that. But please don't do it on this day, because we've got other things that we need to accomplish on that day. So that was all it was, and it was great. And we work now with lots of NHL coaches, head coaches, assistant coaches, NHL skill coaches. And it's a great relationship, because they actually, not only are they okay with that framework, they like it, because confidentially what I found is they've said, hey, we never knew what the hell you guys you don't know what we're doing on the ice. Well, we never knew what the hell you guys were doing on the gym. And you guys are killing their legs, and they're coming out for practice, or they're exhausted and they can't do what we want to do. So integrating those two is, and I would be fine also in a team setting if I had a coach that told me, hey, do whatever you want to do, but on these days, don't do this. I would be okay with that too. But the problem was there was never any cohesion or direction, at least when I was in the league.
I think that's so crucial too. I know it's kind of sexy, long-term athletic development. We all talk about it. Stay off the ice for young kids. Stay off the ice. I get it. Everyone's got their own opinion about this, but for me, I think specifically as you get more and more advanced in your career, you've procured 8, 9, 10 years of resistance training, coupled with the fact that you're a high-level hockey player. If you want to be good and continue to be refined as a hockey player, you got to have touch points on the ice. I'm not condoning conditioning, skating ad nauseum. That's not what I mean. I mean, if you want to get good at playing the guitar, you got to play the guitar. That comes with ice touches. I would argue that as players advance, they may even be more important than weight touches. So to have that as part and parcel of a program, I think is you've created a utopia. And now you've made it real, which I think is unique. And selfishly, I'd love to be able to emulate that model in some capacity. We don't have this say in what our guys do on the ice, but we're slowly working towards that, specifically in the summers with the skill coaches and the coaches that we have. This year, I think will be the first summer that we're able to get on the ice with our guys. I'll be on there with the coaches, and we can have a little bit more of a say, so to speak, on what happens on the ice. But I think it's massively important. So I want to stay in the private sector. Who were some of your mentors? And I want to touch on an individual. I know he's a dear friend of yours, and perhaps you could go on about him. I met him when I first had breakfast with you at the Swiss Symposium. Ken Kanakin. Am I pronouncing Ken's last name? Yep. What a salt of the earth human being, coupled with the fact that he's a brilliant guy. Like he is brilliant. I could not get over the fact of how humble he is, how smart he is, and how he just leaves the world he just leaves the world better when he leaves the room than when he entered it. You know what I mean? Could you give us some of, I know he's one of your mentors. Talk to us about in your private sector, who are some of the people that you continue to learn from, specifically, obviously, in this case, Ken as well.
Well, Ken, that's a great guy to kick it off with, because, one of my mentors has become one of my best friends. And I think that you couldn't be more accurate in your description of Ken. He's just the most humble person. And I think that, that when I think about that Swiss Symposium and the genesis of that event and really what it was. So the very first one that he ever ran, that's when I met Ken. we met through a mutual friend, another chiropractor got to know me. And at the time I was just finished playing football. I was, competing in powerlifting, or trying to compete in powerlifting. And, I was kind of lost, like not lost. I wasn't looking to jump off a bridge or change. I knew what I wanted to do. I was happy with what I was doing, but this is the time. There was no social media, and internet was a new thing, at least to me, right? It was a lot tougher to network back then. It was a lot tougher to get access to information. So this guy said, hey, listen, you've got to meet my friend Ken Kanak, and you guys are going to hit it off. So I went out to see Ken as a patient because this chiropractor that I was seeing said, I can help you a bit, but really you should see this guy because he does exactly what you're looking for. So I went to see Ken as a patient, and we just hit it off right away. And when he told me about this idea that he had, he said basically, and I remember the day when I saw him as a patient the first time. We're sitting in his office. He's got every book, every VHS tape, every DVD, everything you've ever heard of. He's got it. He took the course. He bought the book. He's got the thing. He's got all of it, right? And I made that comment. I said, "Oh my God, you've got like every book I've ever heard of. You've been to every course." And he said, "Yeah, I know, it's pretty crazy." He goes, "But you know what I'm going to do?" He goes, "Next year, I'm going to have my own seminar." And he goes, because I just did the math on it. He said, like, I spend so much money flying all over the world, doing all these things. He goes, like, I'm just going to invite all the people that I want to see. I don't care if anybody else comes, because even if no one buys a ticket, I'm not losing more money because I'm not doing hotels. And he goes, so I'm just going to do it. And I'm just going to invite all these awesome people. And, I just want it to happen. It was like, there was never like this, here's my profit margin, what I got to admit, this is what we're going to nail. And here's the marketing strategy. And this is the sales strategy. It was just like, I'm just going to create this unbelievable conference that I love with people that I'm enamored with. And if you build it, they will come. And I just said, okay, well, whatever I need to do to help. And I literally photocopied, believe it or not, that's how old this story is, but photocopied flyers and went around handing out flyers in gyms, handing out flyers at chiro clinics. So that was the how long I've known Ken. He's just like you said, just the most down to earth, humble, genuine guy you're ever going to meet. And he's such a well-rounded resource of, some people are amazing ART practitioners, or amazing at, acupuncture, or amazing at, this modality or that modality, whatever the case may be. He's probably got the broadest base of anybody I know who's open to any type of healing, whether it's some kind of electromagnetic field, laser, quantum healing, whatever it is. He probably knows about it. He's probably read a book. He's probably taken a course, and he's probably tried it. So very, very cool that way. But, there are lots of guys, it's funny that, a lot of guys you've already mentioned, mentors of mine, Mike Boyle, Lauren Goldenberg, the guys, you talked about Reg Grant too, yourself. I mean, your books are a great resource.
Thanks.
Anyone who's interested in training hockey players, and I shouldn't even say that, not just there, that actually, that's, I'm going to segue again. I promise I'll get back to where we're going, but because your book is about hockey training, because you train hockey players and that's your passion. But any of the principles in that book, you could change the word hockey to anything else. And you may have to modify work to rest ratios slightly, and you may have to modify some of the exercise choices, but the basic principle, that's what holds true. And, we've talked about, we were talking about Eric Serrano before, but through Eric, I met Louis Simmons and Dave Tate at Westside Barbell years ago, and I had the opportunity to train at Westside twice, which is incredible. But
cow.
there's another example of, people that will get written off as, meathead, powerlifter, whatever. But if you replace the word squat with whatever, fill in the blank, you pick the exercise. The thought process of organizing the global training structure, that's the magic. And that's why, I have guys like a guy like Dan Paff is a guy for me, who's like a Yoda of training.
Yep.
And, maybe his specialty or his bread and butter is working with world-class track and field athletes. And that's okay. It doesn't have to be hockey, but it's the thought process that I really get attached to. How did you decide to do this or that, and not this, but choose that? Those are the guys that I really like to spend time with and I get interested in. And I complement that, I would say, nicely with, there are lots of people now, you are absolutely one of those people for sure. There's a younger generation of coaches now that are doing really cutting edge and cool stuff. And, I look at, there's a guy that social media wasn't a thing when I was a young coach, which in some ways I think was really good. In some ways, maybe not as good because that convenient access that everyone has to all this information. But a guy like Joey Burgos I've seen on Instagram, we've kind of gotten to befriend each other, and brilliant guy, the things that he's doing. Jeremy Frisch is a guy that I love what he's doing with young kids in training, and it's just so cool. And it's like, what 10 or 11 or 12-year-old kid wouldn't want to do that? Like that just, it just looks amazing. So I think that the positive of social media is that it's introduced me to some people that, I wouldn't have met otherwise. And it's easy just to like go to the jukebox and keep playing the classics because, especially as you get older, it's comfortable. But I think I've got a nice complement of guys that were mentors to me when I was a young guy that are still in the game. Lauren is still training, elite NFL players, and Mike Boyle is still crushing it and training like 1 million hockey players in Boston. And then there's young coaches now that are coming up and doing things differently than I did at that age, and opening my eyes to new ways of doing things, which is really cool.
Talk to me about the new gym. Much bigger.
Yes.
Tell me when did it officially, when was the official opening? And then tell me a little bit about the footprint and the layout. Yeah, well,
we've never had like an official launch, and we never had that. We never had it at the little dungeon either. It just sort of started happening. I think everything in my life has sort of gone that way. I didn't apply for that Leafs job. I didn't plan to create BioSteel as like a global brand. None of those things were the plan. I didn't plan to launch my business in that little dungeon. It just happens. But it's literally a year ago. It's funny that you mentioned that now. A year ago last week was sort of our first week where the gym was kind of done. Like, it wasn't fully done, but it was at least open for business and operational. But even throughout that whole time, we had Tyler Sagan and Kia Nurse, our best, probably arguably our best female basketball player in Canada, doing rehab in the gym amidst all the construction, which was kind of wild. Like, there's sparks are flying and drywall guys are hammering drywall, and Tyler's doing his knee rehab in the corner. We've been at it for a little longer than that, but our last week was our first, kind of 1 year anniversary of it being open. And it wasn't my desire. I had no desire to leave my little dungeon gym that we talked about or grow the business, or it was nothing. It had nothing to do with that. When COVID hit, we weren't allowed to reopen in our old location. The insurance wouldn't cover it. And we had to go somewhere else. And we were out of home. We were kind of vagabonds for about 6 months, running a pop-up shop in a warehouse or on the other side of town. And we finally found this location. And it's funny how fortuitous life works sometimes, but this is the location that I always was looking for back, 12 years ago, but didn't exist. Even if it did exist, I couldn't have afforded it. It wouldn't have been possible. But now where we are, I mean, there's 4 sheets of ice, 4 Olympic, 4, not like NBA sized basketball courts, 4 beach volleyball courts. There's soccer fields and Mondo track. There's rock climbing and squash and parkour. And we've got a 10,000 square foot space with, more gym space than I ever would have known what to do with. So it's crazy how life works that just sort of we ended up here in this place in this time, but it's exciting for sure.
That's fantastic. I want to respect your time, Matt. I've got one more for you. The pendulum right now swinging in high performance. It may be a broad question. What do you think we, as a strength and conditioning community or sports science community, however you want to talk performance enhancement, what are we doing well? And then what do you think we can improve on? What are we focusing perhaps too much on?
Yeah, I mean, if I'm looking at it through the lens of hockey, I would say that the growth of the sports science side of things and the analytics side of things, I think is a net positive for sure. There's no question about it. And I always find it funny when people argue about the relevance of science or analytics. It's like, what business in the world wouldn't take into account analytics? If you run a pizza joint, you're going to want to know if people are buying more pepperoni or more Hawaiian. You're going to make extra. You're going to make twice as many pepperonis. And I mean, it's crazy to me that people would even have that conversation. So obviously it's important, obviously, but I think that there's sometimes, like you said, that pendulum swings. And I think that back in the day, like old people used to, like me tend to say, but I think that there was a time where nobody was training in hockey, and then everybody was kind of doing some stuff. And then all of a sudden, whether it was Charles Poliquin or whoever was the kind of spearheaded that charge, I think quite a bit of the training maybe was, like good that they were doing stuff, but maybe not super appropriate all the time for hockey. Some of that pendulum was swinging back the other way as, like you said, I was speaking to a prep school kid last week who's on the ice 4 times a day right now, four times a day.
Gosh.
And not training. So the kid is barely strong enough to tie his skates and hold a stick, but he's on the ice 4 times a day. Now is that, do I think he should be off the ice and only training? No, absolutely not. I think that it's understanding that balance where everything fits. And I think that you alluded to something earlier about how, we have to make the understanding that it's not powerlifting. So it's not about copying a powerlifting program or copying an Olympic lifting program or a bodybuilding program. It's about understanding that you are training for a highly skilled sport. It's hockey, highly skilled, and you need all those components. You need to be working on skill, and you need to be working on fitness, and you need to be working on strength. But really what you need is someone like yourself or myself or anybody who's listening to be able to coordinate all those things. It's not about, what's more important? Is it more important to be on the ice or not? Or is it more important to lift weights or do aerobic work? It's not about that. They're all important. It's all important. It's about coordinating all those things together to get the optimal result for each person. And I think that's really the key.
I said last one, but I got one more for you. Your legacy. You've been in this game for a long time. You're a fine human being. How do you want to be remembered?
That's a great question. I think probably the thing that I'm most proud of is the number of athletes that we had play, more than 1,000 games in the NHL, and how many of the guys we've come through are now general managers and assistant general managers, head coaches, assistant coaches in the NHL. And probably even more important than any of that is how many of these guys that I can run into now, and they're happy, healthy, coaching other kids now, passing on. And they're not my exercises or my nutrition facts or my anything. They're things that I learned from the Ken Kanakins of the world, and the Mauro Di Pasquales and the Eric Serranos and the Paul Checks and the Mike Boyles and the whoever's of the world. So just seeing those people paying it forward and helping other kids, that's really cool to me, because it means that I've helped, the good messages or at least the things that I think are good, I've helped those move on and live on and carry on beyond me and beyond the 4 walls of my little dungeon. That means a lot.
Our guest today has been Matt Nichol. Matt, thanks so much for joining us.
Anthony, always great chatting.